Our Father and our God, we appreciate the gift of life. You've given us yet another morning in the middle of October to learn and to know you. We commit ourselves to you. Everybody that is here and is going to turn up for this class, we present ourselves to you. Speak to us, Lord. Help us to become better men, better sons, better fathers, Lord, better family people, better servants in anything that you put us to do. We surrender to you and we honor you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Share the screen. The sound. Lesson number 3.
Well, good morning, gentlemen. You guys look bright and alert. You ready to go? Take that first step that Bill's been talking about. Last week we looked at a broad but balanced overview of authentic manhood, and we said authentic manhood is expressed in 4 faces. Do you remember those last week? We talked about the king face, the face of the king that you see in a man who expresses nobility and righteousness and integrity in his life. We talked about the face of the warrior, the face of power, of perseverance, of strength. We talked about that you see in the man a face of a lover, tenderness, sensitivity, romance. And then finally, the face of the friend, the one who exhibited transparency and trust and accountability. Those, in a sense, are the 4 broad faces of authentic manhood. It kind of gave us a first look at what a real man looks like. And I shared those with you because it gives us a first pass, but it also begins to offer to us what at least one of the promises that I made to you at the very beginning, that would be that we were going to be developing a manhood language together. And I think even in mentioning those 4 faces, we get the first, in a sense, seed form of that language, because you can go out now just with those 4 faces and you can see a guy and you can say, you know, that guy lacks a strong king in his life. If I said that to you, you would know exactly what I meant, wouldn't you? Or I could say that, in looking at another fellow, I can say, you know, he has a weak warrior in him. What I mean by that, immediately you would pick up on that. You would know he doesn't have this kind of inner passion to push him over the top. He's not a conqueror. You may say to one guy, he's got a strong friend face, and to another, his friend face is more of a user than a friend. You'd know exactly what I meant. That's kind of the beginning of what I call a manhood language. Now, over the course of the year, we will build on that language, and that language begins to connect us together as men, soul to soul. Because we can begin to speak about more things than just sports and our golf game and our new car and those kind of things. We can speak at a soul level as men, and it's very important that men have a manhood language to talk with one another about. Now, when you came in here with your notes, you received this manhood plan, and I want you just to look at it just for a moment. I want to put some dates on your manhood plan. Because here at the beginning of the year, you need to see this, because this is how we're going to finish the year. When we finish the year, if you stick with us through the whole year, which I hope that you do, the great moment is going to be when you can share your plan with the other men in your group, and you can also give this plan to me, which is a requirement for graduation. It's the only thing I'm going to ask you to do, but it is a profound instrument if you will do it. There are really 3 parts to this plan. As you open it up, the very first part you're going to see is a plan that says to look back. And that's what we're going to be covering through the fall together. And if you would, you just might jot down, you need to finish this look back by December, by the first week in December. The way you finish this part is I want you to follow the outline just as it's there. I want you to answer those questions and think deeply about looking back. Now, right now, a lot of those questions may not make real good sense to you, and that's okay. As we go through, all the questions will become clear. But these questions will take you where you need to go to look back, which we'll take the first step on today. Then we'll look at now, starting in January. And as we look at now, there are some questions about where you are now. I want you to follow those questions exactly as well. And you need to have that finished by March 1st. So you might just jot down March 1st there. And then finally, a look ahead. And we'll be doing that in March and April, and you're going to need to have that finished by April the 1st so that you can turn it in as we finish men's fraternity together. And that look ahead there at the end, that'll also take you back to the very first page, which says when you're really finished. And there's a little tombstone there. And all that you've done, looking back, looking at now, and looking ahead, you're going to summarize that on that little tombstone, because we need to live our lives with the end in mind. I like the little verse on the front of the manhood plan that says, "Teach us to number our days that we might present to Thee a heart of wisdom." Basically, you can summarize that up by saying men need to live their lives with the end in mind. So what I want to do for you with this manhood plan is I want you to think deeply about where you've been, give you a moment to do that through the fall, then think deeply about where you are now. We'll do that January, February, and part of March. And then I want you to think deeply about where you're going and how you want to finish your life. Real men have a plan. The unauthentic man or the unhealthy man has no plan. He lives in the immediate. He lives in the now. He just reacts to life. And that's why he doesn't go anywhere. But real men have a plan. So I want to give you the opportunity to do that, then to finish that, and then leave men's fraternity with a clear outline or framework for you, personalized by you, of the kind of man that you want to be and want to become. And that's what the manhood plan is all about. Now, this morning we're in session 3. And here in session 3, we want to take what I consider to be the first step in authentic manhood. And the first step to me in authentic manhood is in looking back. Real men have to look back in their life. Some of you remember years ago when the Olympic Games used to feature a little segment called Up Close and Personal. How many of you remember that? The Up Close and Personal segment. I mean, here would be this great Olympic athlete about to ski, about to go off one of the giant runs like the giant slalom. And just as he gets up there and gets his skis over the edge, they would have a flashback. And that flashback would take you back to his home in Switzerland or in Austria or in America, and you would get to see all the events in just a small summary form of this man's life that brought him to this incredible moment. And what you discovered is that these great Olympic athletes didn't get there just by accident or happenstance, or even because they were naturally great athletes. There was a series of events and a series of decisions, personal decisions, and sometimes coincidences that you would just be amazed at, that brought them to this incredible place where they got to perform on a world stage. You learned how they got to be what they are from their past. I remember my daughter swam for an AAU team here in Little Rock called the Little Rock Dolphins. And during those years that she swam, we had to get up at 5 in the morning to get her in the pool by 5:30 to swim for a couple of hours. And we thought that was making a big sacrifice. But there was a young man named John who was growing up an hour and a half from Little Rock who would get up every morning at 3. And his parents would drive him to Little Rock to swim at 5:30 and then take him back to Clinton, Arkansas so he could go to school. And we followed that all the way through grade school while she swam and with John and into junior high. And it was just an incredible story of perseverance and courage and discipline and hard work. In fact, it was so hard that when my daughter got to high school, she gave swimming up. But John continued to persevere. And you know, years later, I sat in front of my television set and I watched John Hargis line up in a pool in Atlanta and win the gold medal for the U.S. Everybody has a story. Everybody in this room is who they have become because of events in your past and decisions you made and circumstances that came in, sometimes that you had nothing to do with, but all of those became a mixture that created you to become the kind of person that you are today. But there's a problem with the past. And the problem is this: most of us don't really know our own story. We know parts of our story. We like to tell, in fact, the best parts. But none of us, or maybe I should say many of us, have not taken the time to really think through our past and analyze our past in a way that explains us to us, where we really understand why we are the way we are and why we do the things the way that we do them. And without this kind of understanding, we cannot change the things that need to be changed in order to grasp the authentic manhood that we were meant to live. We need to understand ourselves. Everybody has a story. And if you don't understand your story in a way that makes a difference in the way you live now, then what I find in so many men is that instead they're driven by themes and forces they don't understand, or themes and forces they're not willing to face, they've buried in their life, or they misunderstand, that rob them of the authentic manhood that they were meant to live. Do you know your story? Do you know why you are the way you are? And why you do what you do? Have you explained you to you? It's the first step in authentic manhood. That's why we have the saying that's endured through time that says this: the unexamined life is not worth living. Everyone needs to know why they are the way they are. Well, rather than saying more about the importance of looking back, I thought maybe this morning, since so many of you are new to this setting and new to me, and I'm new to you, and you don't really know me, I thought I would model the very thing that I'm saying here today by taking you back and just kind of telling you my story. It'll help introduce me to you in a more up-close and personal way, but it'll also help you understand the speaker who stands in front of you this week a little more intimately. And I think that's important in the journey that we're going to go on together. For starters, let me just tell you that I grew up in a 1950s family. And we were somewhat the typical family, except maybe in two ways. Both of my parents worked. And in the 1950s, that was different, because most moms stayed home. But most of my parents both worked. And what we had to have because of that is we had to have someone to come in to us three boys and take care of us. So I kind of grew up in daycare in the 1950s. I tell people I grew up in the modern family before it was modern. Second thing that was kind of unique about our home in the 1950s was that we were really a non-church going family in a small southern town. And that was different because most everybody else went to church. When Sunday came around, we rolled over rather than get up and get dressed and go to a local church. Now, we were on the rolls of a local church. I remember, in fact, one time, this was only happened one time, but I remember when the Methodist minister came to call on my family. Being a family that really didn't go to church much, I remember when the pastor came in and sat down with my folks and us, I remember how foreign that felt. It really was strange. And I can remember when he finally said goodbye and walked out the door, my mom shut the door and leaned up against it and just went, whew. She was just glad that was over. It was like we were in two different universes at that moment. And now looking back on it, I think, it was kind of strange that I never saw my parents pray, ever, at a meal or anything. We never had one serious spiritual discussion of any kind all the years that I lived at home. And that affected me, had an impact on my life. But those were kind of the two of the general distinctions of growing up in the 50s. But with that said, let me introduce you to my family for just a moment. I want to introduce you first to my dad. My dad's name was Thomas Charles Lewis, and he grew up in a well-to-do family in Ruston, Louisiana. His dad was a successful businessman. He was the owner of the local paper there and editor of the Ruston Daily Leader. And because of that, my dad had things that a lot of other young men didn't, and I think he used those to play a lot. At least that's kind of the reputation he had as a young man growing up. In fact, when he was in his early 20s, he took off and went and lived in Southern California. Later, when the war started, my dad joined the U.S. Army and went and fought in France, and he was a proud United States veteran of the war. And after the war, he came back to Louisiana and settled in Ruston and became an insurance agent. That's what he did for a living. Then there was my mom, Lily Ethel Taylor Lewis. They called her Billy. She was the daughter of a farmer, lived in Farmersville, as a matter of fact, Farmersville, Louisiana. And she was the youngest of 10 children. My mom was a very strong-willed, determined, ambitious woman. And I think that's why, rather than being a homemaker, she was a working woman. She became an office manager of a fairly large legal firm. She was the personal assistant to a lawyer who became the lieutenant governor of the state of Louisiana. And then later, after he passed on and his son became head of the firm, he became a state senator, and she worked for that firm for 38 years. Then there was my older brother, Charles, who was 4 years older than me. Charles was a really smart individual, a guy who was very talented, especially in art. And when he graduated from college, he was trying to get entrance into the Los Angeles School of Art. He was very talented in that regard, but it was also at the height of the Vietnam War. And because of that, and because his number was one of the first drawn, he had to instead put off that career and then enter into the Navy, and he became an interpreter in the Navy. And then that changed his whole career, because while he was in the Navy, he decided art wasn't the way to go, so he later ended up a lawyer in Houston, Texas, guys. Then there was my younger brother, John, who was 2 years younger than me. John was kind of the easygoing, fun-loving, musically talented guy in the family. And then there was me, the not-so-smart but very energetic kid who loves sports and loves them to this day. For 17 years, as you look at those 5 individuals, we were pressed together for 17 years in a small white brick house at 308 South Bonner Street there in Ruston, Louisiana. And just like you, though your family picture may look a lot different than mine, but just like you, those formative years were formative. The experiences there, the moments there, the influences there help shape, in a large part, the kind of person that you see standing in front of you today. In fact, I want to just share with you some moments that shaped my life, and then we'll summarize it and I'll apply it to you. First of all, I'd say there were some good moments from our family. You know, I felt generally supported by my parents growing up. My parents came to my ball games. My parents were the kind of people who would show up at school events, especially my mom. She got involved in those school events, and I felt her support there. Our home was always open to my friends, and because I was kind of a leader type, I was always bringing large numbers of guys over to her house. My mom loved them to come over and cook for them, and provided a place where it was fun to be at my house. So I felt generally supported all the way growing up. I have great memories of our annual Florida vacation. Every year when summer came, the big event for our family was all to load up in the back of our Rambler with no air conditioning, which I could have done without. And pressed together, we would drive from Louisiana down to Pensacola and spend a week or two at the beach. A few times my dad took my brother and I fishing. You know, it's interesting, I can remember every one of those fishing events in detail. 4 or 5 times we went fishing, just my brother John and I and Dad. And looking back on those moments, I would say that was the best of Dad. Those moments where there was no agenda, just me and Dad together for a whole day of pure joy to a little kid. And remembering back on those moments, I learned something, and I learned how much a son's soul craves the best of Dad and just to be with Dad in those kind of moments. There were also noble moments, not just good moments, but noble moments in our family. The way my mom took care of her aging parents, that taught me a lot about loyalty to family. The way my dad would get up every Veterans Day at 3 a.m. and go out and put flags on every veteran's grave. He was known for that. Even when he became very aged and his health had been robbed from him, the one thing he would relentlessly do is get up on Veterans Day and go out and put those little flags by every grave to honor those men. I also remember that my dad taught me a lot about human dignity. Remember, both my parents worked, and so we had to have people come in and take care of us. One of the individuals that my dad enlisted to take care of us was an African-American kid named James Jones. And I don't know how my dad connected with him. I never will figure that out. But he picked this young man out and brought him into our home. And at night, he would, in the afternoons and evenings, a lot of times, he would stay with us. And my dad had a real special relationship with James. And I can remember when I was about 10, starting to get a little rambunctious one night. James was trying to put us to bed, and I didn't want to go to bed. And I got mad. I got furious. I remember it's the 50s. And I remember James saying, "You got to go to bed." And I looked at him and I said, "Nigger." James grabbed me and threw me over his leg and gave me a good swat on the rear and put me in the bed. And as he's putting me in the bed, I said, "I'm going to tell my dad that you hit me." And I can remember there was a little fear in his eyes. And as soon as my dad came in, I remember James standing behind me and he said, "Mr. Lewis, Robert called me a nigger." And the next thing I knew, I was flying through the air. Landed over my dad's knee, and I got the spanking of my life. And he pulled me up after that, and he said, "Never, ever use those words again." And I learned a lot about human dignity. You know what? I think James learned a lot, too. James was the first person in his family to ever graduate from college. Did so because of that special bond that my dad had with him all those years in that small southern town. But there were noble moments in our family. There were also missed moments. There was no critical life instruction from my mom and dad. You know, it's interesting, growing up and being around them all the time, there were so many missed moments concerning just basic life skills. Never had a discussion with my dad about girls. He never told me about money or cars or manhood or how a man looks or acts. And so I always felt a certain sense that I had to do it alone. Maybe you had that feeling growing up. In fact, I remember my senior year when I was being recruited by Tennessee and Arkansas and LSU and Ole Miss, and all these schools were calling, especially my home school, LSU, putting all this pressure on me. The coaches were flying up to meet with me and talk with me, and the governor was calling me on the phone saying I had to sign with LSU, and I was so confused. At 17, I looked at my dad, I said, "What do I do?" And he said, "Hey, it's up to you." And I wanted somebody, it was up to me, but I wanted somebody to process life with me. And because I had no one to process with, I made a lot of mistakes. And in making a lot of mistakes, it made me at times an angry person, because when I left home at 17, I left clueless about life. There was also no emotional closeness, especially from my dad. You know, I never heard my dad say, "I love you." I never heard my dad say, "I'm proud of you." Now, Dad was around, but it was funny. He felt close and strangely distant at the same time. And for a young guy growing up, 14, 15, 16, that's hard to put together. When your dad feels like he's real close but real distant. And yet that was always our relationship. We had these missed moments. There were also hurtful moments. Probably the most hurtful moment was around alcohol that my dad increasingly gave himself to as I moved into my teenage years. It was also kind of the key issue that began to unravel my mom and dad's marriage in the process, because they were constantly at odds with one another, bickering, fighting, nagging one another. And we three kids running around in that home and then getting bigger through the years were kind of caught in the middle of this war. and in some strange way were invited in to help manage it. Now, my two other brothers, my older brother, he just begged off. My younger brother just went passive. And for whatever reason, maybe it's just because of my personality, but again, these are the events that shape a life. I felt like I had to be the negotiator. So I got enlisted into the war as the negotiator between mom and dad. And I remember trying to do that at 14 and 15 and 16 and 17 and 18, trying to bring peace to our home. And I made both of them mad at me. And you know, it's tough to be a teenager and be managing your home and your parents. But that's where I found myself. And you know, you swallow a lot of pain when you're starting to take care of your parents when they should be taking care of you. And you also swallow a lot of shame. I remember one day my dad asked me to go down and pick up a couple of tools from a hardware store. We only had one in Ruston. And I went down because he was working on a table that he was putting together. There were a group of guys in this hardware store. And I went in and I was asking for the stuff that my dad asked me to buy. And they said, well, what are you doing? I said, well, my dad's building a table. And one of the guys turned to a couple of the other guys standing there and said, yeah, Tommy Lewis doesn't know much about, you know, building stuff, but he sure knows a lot about alcohol. And everybody had this big laugh. And there I am standing with my little tools in my hand. And inside, I'm dying. Because I felt nothing but just a massive amount of shame that I didn't know what to do with. There were also defining moments. Probably the defining moment occurred after I left home, but it had been occurring all the way through my years at home. It was at my wedding. You see a picture of my wedding there, and there's my brothers to the right, and there is my wife's parents to the left. Notice my wife's dad. He didn't look real excited about who she's marrying at the moment. He looks pretty stiff there. And then there's my mom over to my left. And you're probably wondering what I was wondering that day. Where's my dad? When I showed up at my wedding, my dad didn't show up. Later, I found out he was so drunk, he couldn't get out of bed. And I remember driving off with my new bride out of Ruston to our honeymoon. As we passed that city limit sign, I said to myself, I'm going to be better than that. And it became one of the defining themes of my life. I'm going to be better than that. You see, everybody has a story. Every guy in here has a story. Your story is different than mine, but in some ways it's probably similar to mine. Everybody is who they have become because of moments like that. Noble moments, missed moments, hurtful moments, defining moments. You are who you are in part because of those things. But do you understand those things? And maybe the bigger question, do you understand how those things are impacting your life right now? You see, to be a real man, you got to look back. You got to figure that out and decide what's worth keeping and what's worth throwing away. When I left home, I left clueless. I had all kinds of mixed messages going on in my soul. Some of those were good. Some of them were not so good. The good ones were when I was on the campus at the University of Arkansas in the 60s, and it was a big anti-war environment. I felt love for my country. You know where I got that? You know where I got it. At the same time when I was on the campus, you know, there would be times where I'd be talking to some friends and somebody would say a racist statement or make a racist joke, and it always made me mad. You know where I got that? You know where I got that. At the same time, I was clueless about girls, and I made a lot of mistakes with girls. And I made a lot of mistakes with money. And the car that I had that I'd bought going to college, I screwed up because I didn't know how to keep it. I didn't know how to change the oil. I didn't know how to inflate the tires. All I knew how to do when something went wrong with my car is to lift the hood, call a mechanic over and say, see this iron thing here with wires coming out of it? Something's wrong. But you know, when you're clumsy in life, it makes you mad. And anger was the one emotion I would allow myself to feel after leaving home. See, I didn't want to feel, because to feel was to feel shame. So I just didn't feel at all. And that was a problem that carried with me into my 20s and 30s. But I did allow myself to feel anger. And I was mad a lot. And the one thing that made me the maddest is when I failed at something, because I was a driven personality. Because I had learned that the only way I got feedback in life was to succeed. That's why I think I did well in sports. Because when I did well, somebody would say, you did good. And I was this little soul wanting somebody to tell me that I was doing good in life, because nobody at home told me. And so I would push myself and drive myself and work hard. I didn't know why I was working so hard and I was such an intense personality, but I was, because back there in the roots of my life, it got created. Everybody has a story, and everybody needs to understand their story so they can become the kind of man that they need to be. Now, let me just make some observations about looking back, because this is what's going to start our journey over the next several weeks. I want to give you just kind of 6 basic observations about looking back here as we finish up this morning. Here's the first one. My story is not unique, which I just told you. Now, you just got an up-close and personal glimpse into my life. But as a man, here's what I've learned. I can tell my story because I know now I'm not alone. I used to think I was alone. I used to think everybody like you out there, that you had it good, and I had it not so good. I had it kind of mixed. You know what I find? A lot of guys, they all think everybody had it better than them. But that's just not true. No matter how good you look on the outside, there's a lot of stuff going on every man on the inside. Some of those things are hurtful. Some of those things feel like vacuums and missed moments. Some of those things are noble. But everybody has a story. And discovering that other men are like you is one of the great benefits of a meeting like this called Men's Fraternity. Secondly, I learned when a boy fails to connect with his dad, demons of one kind or another often fill the void. When dad's not there, it leaves a hole in a son's psyche. Whether dad wasn't there emotionally or whether dad wasn't there altogether, leaves a hole. And the son's going to fill it with something. Some are going to fill it with cheap, tragic substitutes. Whether it's workaholism, machoism, sexual addiction, alcoholism, power games, being like me, a driven personality, or other extremes. It's all seeking to compensate for something that should have been there, but wasn't. And what often isn't there in a man's life is a reconciled, healthy relationship with the most significant person in his life growing up, and that's God. Third, many men have yet to reckon with their past or close out the unfinished business that still lives there. As I told you, this may be due to denial, looking back. Some guys don't want to look back. They don't want to lift the manhole cover. It might be due to lack of courage or just plain ignorance about the past and how the past affects now. But regardless of the reason, the truth is that some men are still trying to win at 40 or 50 mom or dad's approval. And they don't even know that they're doing it. I met a young guy, well, actually wasn't a young guy, he was in his 30s. He was attempting to finish his dissertation in philosophy at the University of Chicago, very prestigious school. I remember sitting with him having coffee, and he said, it won't matter. He was trying to get the energy, the warrior up to finish his dissertation. He said, it won't matter. I said, what do you mean it won't matter? The guy had done phenomenally well in school. He said, I'll finish it and I'll show it to my dad, and he'll say some remark like, why couldn't you do better? His whole life had been to jump a little higher to somehow hear Dad say, you've done good, son. But his dad always had a critical comment, or why couldn't you put the bar a couple of feet higher than where it was? Why couldn't you have made all A's rather than all A's except for one B? Why didn't you get in Harvard instead of the University of Chicago? It was always something else that kept him from feeling that. And his whole life had been defined by winning Dad's approval. There are some like me who are for years unknowingly trying to redeem the family name to get rid of that shame. That was me. I didn't know that, but now looking back, that's why I drove myself. I wanted to have someone tell me, hey, you're doing good. You're good. And I could kind of clear the name, the Lewis name. But if you had asked me at 21 I was doing that, I couldn't, whether I was doing that or not, I would have said, what are you talking about? Because I didn't understand what was driving me. Some men blame their past and just become helpless, irresponsible victims in life. Oh, I had it bad, so now that's going to excuse me to be bad. Some men are still trying to deny or excuse the evil they've done in their past. And that's why they're stuck in their manhood. Some men squander the rich family heritage that they had. And because of that, and because they refuse to admit that, they're never going to right the boat of manhood for their own life. There are all kinds of things that can be unfinished business that needs to be dealt with in order to move on in a healthy way in the kind of manhood that every man should embrace. Fourth, until a man unpacks his past and deals with the themes and the pain that resides there, he can never be an authentic man. You know, at some point, every guy's got to unpack his past. That's why I say the first step to authentic manhood is looking back. I talked to a very successful businessman a few years ago who had made a fortune in a number of business enterprises. Very impressive. In fact, so impressive that it was very obvious the guy would never need to work another day in his life. And so I asked him, because one of the kind of the premier characteristics of his life was the 80-hour week. That he didn't need to work that much. And I said, you know, you seem to, still be just pushing it as hard as ever. Why is that? And he kind of reflected for a moment, and just in a brief moment of vulnerability, he kind of cracked open his heart. And he said, when I was growing up in Illinois, we lived in a trailer outside of town. My dad didn't work. My mom had to take care of us. We never had enough of anything. And I remember going to school, at this public school, and some of the kids ridiculing me for the old clothes that I wore, the fact I only had one pair of shoes. He said, when I was 16, I decided to start my first business. And I remember stepping out of that trailer and looking back, and I said to myself these words, I'm going to get as far away from this trailer as I can get. Then he went, closed back up for a moment. When I walked away, I thought, here he is, has millions of dollars, could enjoy life or do things with his life other than work. But you know what he's still trying to do? Tell me. He's still trying to get away from the trailer, isn't he? Because he's not unpacked his past. Always living in the past, men, is not manhood. It's boyhood. Playing the victim because of your past is not manhood, it's boyhood. Working all the time to achieve things that you don't even understand is not manhood, it's boyhood. Denying your feelings rather than grieving over your pain, which you may need to do, is not manhood, it's boyhood. Disconnecting from your past rather than connecting with it and understanding it and having the courage to deal with it, it's not manhood, it's boyhood. You need to unpack the past. Fifth, you cannot become a real man without help. There is no such thing as a self-made man. The scripture says, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. The truth of the matter is, no man can become an authentic man without the help of other men. We need their insight. We need their accountability. We need their balance in our life. There were two men in my life who were absolutely essential with getting me through my teenage years and into my more adult years. One was a coach who just picked up on the fact that I was a needy kid, and he noticed me. You know how powerful that is for an older man to notice you, especially a coach. It was just the little things that he did that affirmed me for a few things that I had, but it stabilized me in a very unsteady time living in a home with an alcoholic dad. His name was Coach Garrett. And if you know my son, my oldest son, he's named Garrett because of the incredible impact that that coach had in that brief period in my life. Now, there was another man that made a big impact, and I'll tell you about him later in the weeks to come. But I just want you to know this. There is no such thing as a self-made man. There are men who have self-made success, but they may have that success at the expense of a number of other things personally. They may be short-sighted. They may be unhealthy. They may be imbalanced, and they may be riddled with a number of blind spots. But a healthy man has other men in his life to help make him who he needs to be. And then finally, a final principle is this. For better or worse, we are all significantly shaped by the family life we experienced. The past helps explain you and me. But listen, I want to make a very important announcement here at the end after all that I've said about the past, and it's this. Yes, we are products of the past, but no, we are not prisoners of the past. Did you guys hear that? Write it down. Yes, we are products of the past, but no, we are not prisoners of the past unless we choose to be. And we can choose to be by ignoring the past or denying the past, or worse, surrendering to the past. That's why it's important to unpack our past, so we can take a look at what's in there and we can choose to keep the things that have influenced us in a good sense. But at the same time, by unpacking the past and telling our story and explaining ourselves not just to us but to others, we can invite help and assistance to break free of those things from our past that are holding us back from the kind of manhood we need to achieve. It can be done, guys. And it's exciting. It's become an exciting, freeing adventure for me, because I don't go around with shame anymore, and I don't go around with all this suppressed anger anymore. And I don't go around clueless anymore about life. And it's freeing because it ushers you into a whole new existence called authentic manhood. And it can be done. And a lot of good men have done it. But here's what I want you to know. It requires for every man this first step to authentic manhood. It's the step called looking back. Are you ready for it? Are you ready to look back? That's what we'll be doing in the weeks to come.
Wow. That is our lesson, gentlemen. Looking back. Got to look back. I forgot that I needed, but that's okay. All right. We ought to discuss. Today we happen to be a smaller group. It happens that way. We've been leading groups for a long time. It begins large. It thins down. But you know what? I soldier on and I keep on because it is important. Don't worry about who didn't come. You are here. And we are looking back. Everybody has a story. Everybody has a past. So, are you looking back? That's the question. Are you looking back? I am blessed by this material every time I look at it. The two verses that were used, and they happened to be on that page 92. Where we have the manhood plan. Those verses are very key. The first verse is Psalms 90, verse 12. Teach us to number our days, that we may present to you a heart of wisdom. We got to be wise. I always think about past, present, and future. The past could be what it was. That is not what defines you. It's what you're doing today. If the past was problematic, you can shape it today. See, the family you grew up in, the family I grew up in, we are told not to be slaves to that, or even prisoners to that. We can soldier on. My daddy never went to college. I've gone to college the farthest I could go. Yeah. None of my siblings went past high school. I must tell you that. Some of them tasted a little college. I was born with 5 other brothers and 2 sisters, meaning we were 8. How did I become different? The choices I made. Choices have consequences. I can tell you my story. It's not a secret. I grew up in an ordinary family. We were all 8. I have said we were 5 brothers, me included, we were 6, and 2 sisters. I was the second born, but literally I was the third. I was the third born, but the second, because we were 9. Our firstborn died. And I can tell you a story about that in my custom. The children, the children are named kind of in the family. So the first son in my community is the father of your father. The second son is the father of your mother, named like that. The first daughter is the mother of the mother of your mother, like our first daughter here is my mother in my marriage. So like that, and then the second daughter is the mother of your mother. You take the name of that. So I am actually the father of my father because I was born third born, and the first son had died. So I took that first name, and that means something. You carrying the family legacy. You carrying it forward. So I carry the family name. And that gives me tremendous responsibility. I feel it. I want to make sure that I don't drop the ball. And I have not dropped it, I must tell you. But what happened to me? Choices I made. At the age of 12, some preachers came to our school and they presented the gospel and I accepted it. I was 12. 12 years old, 1972. I have never looked back. Well, I was frugal for some time, religious, but I committed in a big way. But actually, that first seed that was planted, it never died. It never died. Never died. So I have a history, and of course, looking at all what has happened, the good moments in the family, the number moments in the family, the missed moments in the family, and so on and so forth. My daddy worked in the city. He worked in the city of Nairobi. And my mother and all of our siblings, we were in the farm with our mother. And there was coffee. Now, coffee bushes grow. They produce those little seeds. The seeds ripen. And you have to harvest the coffee, pick it, and take it to the factory. That was our life. Making sure that the coffee bushes were weeded for. When they were ripe, we pick the coffee and take it to the factory. We had to do that. And our father came on Saturday to find out whether we did it. And he came home like a supervisor, and he was a bit rough if it did not happen. That's our life. Also, we had those traditional crops like corn and beans. We had to weed at them. We had some goats and cows. We had to take care of them. Domestic animals that would give us milk, meat, chicken. So we were farm people. But the life of a kid is to go to school, come back home, help with the chores. Go to school, come back home. But our mother managed all that. Our father would come on Friday evening and leave on Sunday evening. Come on Friday evening home, be with us through the weekend, and go to the city. So on Sunday, actually, we were taken to church. We were taken to church on Sunday. Those formative years, we would be dropped to church, and then my father, he made sure we went, but he was not bothered. He made sure we went, but he was not bothered. So I caught what I caught, and I did not mind about him. So there were number of moments, there were good moments, there were missed moments because he was out in the city for the whole week. So if there were parents meeting, it is mom who came to them. If there were sports, none of our parents really attended our sports. We did what we had to do. Did that deter us from really growing? So there were hurtful moments. Like one day, something did not happen about that coffee that I'm telling you. It was raining, a very rainy day. And my father was not understanding why the coffee was not picked, but it was raining so hard. None of the other neighbors did it. And I saw him slap my mother. That has never left my head because it was totally unreasonable. Why would you do that? Who could have done it when the rain is like coming down in torrents? So he was unhappy that coffee was not picked. To me, he was unreasonable. It has never left my head. And when I grew up, I actually confronted him on that point. I asked him, Daddy, do you think really you would have picked coffee when it was raining torrents like that? Why did you slap mom that day? Well, that was a hurtful moment. It has made me never to put hands on my wife or on anyone. I don't fight. I don't fight. It doesn't make you anybody. So that was a hurtful moment. Defining moments like trips that we took, trips that you take kids like to the city, they were very defining moments. There were national days, like there are two holidays that are very popular in our country. They must be popular here too. There is a day that the country became independent, that is June 12th, no, June 1st, and then when it became a republic, December 12th. So there are two Kiswahili words. There is Madaraka Day, that is when we became self-governing. That was the June 12th. No, then the June 1st, and then Republic December 12th. So those there were parades that were made, and our daddy at least would come home and take us to those ones. And I was happy to see those. So those were very defining moments, and it made me feel proud about our country. Other defining moments are like when you graduate from a college. That's defining. Another defining moment is baptism, Another defining moment is wedding, wedding, Those defining moments, you had better have your parents. So I'm saying all this to say what happened to me, but I would love for you to reflect on what happens to you. And those of you who are daddies, reflect on whether you join your kids, don't be absent. Yeah. I remember very fondly about leaving home, the number D there of, leaving home. I vividly remember the first trip that I made leaving home was to go to a boarding school. Then another living is when I was given the very first employment and I had to go to another place. I remember some of the things that I bought. A bed that could fold. You know those, we call them safari bed, a bed that fold, and a mattress that you roll. So you tie them together, the bed and the mattress, they're just a little sack, and you put them, you know, those days, the kind of vehicles you traveled in, the public transport, put it on top of the car and together with other luggage. And that was what I left home with. Plus the fact that I was a teacher. I untrained. Untrained. So I went and taught a little bit, and then invitation came to go to another level of learning. And I never forget those moments, defining moments of leaving home. I left home many times to different places, to work, to high school, to college, to the United States, all those living there, defining moments. They will never be forgotten. So my story is not unique. It's just like your story. You know your story, right? If there were, hurtful moments, don't let those be the things to define you. If there were great moments, treasure them. I think stories are good. They help us reflect. But who writes the story? You write your story. You write your story. Let's look at questions that are on page 17 there. The small group here is for discussion. What personal assets did you leave home with because of your family life? I know some of the young men might say they never left home, but they have. I know Eric has left home for some, So what would you say? You're reflecting. What are some assets you left home with? How would you respond to that first question? Ron, you are the back, and I know you have done this lesson.
When I left home, Dr. Karanja, I was 17, about to turn 18. I went to the United States Navy.
Uh-huh.
My birthday was probably like 30 days away from me leaving.
Yeah.
I remember I left with my key to the house and the money I earned from my summer job, which is about $400. I told my mom, I told her where it was at, and my recruiter picked me up. And I like to believe when I left with a sense of responsibility, industriousness, and to pay my way.
Yep.
Yep.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. That's how you left home. Good. I can tell you, and then I'll let you talk. You see, my daddy worked in the city. He came home and spent the money he earned with us in the family. So to me, hard work. I think he used to work hard. Whatever he earned in the city, he came and spent in our little land. All the coffee bushes that were growing there, he would plant them with us on a Saturday. If anything happened to a plant, he would replace it. The cows that were there, he would come and buy them, purchase them, and actually help us raise them. I learned hard work. I learned responsibility. I learned that you have to nurture something. See that little plant there? One time it almost dried up, but now it is sprouting. I like to plant things and let them grow. I like to see them. And so I also left home with a sense of hard work and responsibility, nurturing. You must actually complete what you start. That's something I left home with. Some people start things, they never finish them. They never finish. If you don't finish what you start, why did you start it at all? I think the idea of thinking through what you got to do is key. And when you make a decision, I'm going to do this, do it. Do it. Do it, do it, do it. So what did you leave home with? Maybe I'll pick you. Tell us.
Like you, my father was all about hard work, and he also was pretty sick, had a lot of health problems, but he didn't let that stop him. You know, he still I remember him going out the door, and my mother worrying, you know, had arthritis at a young age, crippled. I mean, bad. He worked on the railroad, and just hard work and just keep pushing, you know, and got to get up and go to work, no
Yeah.
matter. Sometimes, you know, but that's one thing you know, pride myself, you know, I don't miss work, you know. Back in the day, they used to kind of recognize you for that. It doesn't seem to mean as much as it used to. But I remember when I had like 30 years, never missed a day with the company I worked for, and they announced it at a meeting. And after the meeting, a couple guys come up to me and they said, "Don't you ever get up in the morning and say, man, I'm calling in sick, I'm going fishing?" I remember laughing about that, but it's just a different way of thinking, you know. But that's just something that stuck with me, you know.
Thank you, Albert. Everybody has a story. You left home?
I did. I mean, all my life I've left home, so to speak, multiple times because I grew up in orphans, so I grew up in my aunts households and stuff. So I was bouncing around cities and stuff, having to grow up in different households. And of course I went to boarding school. Of course I also went to college in a different country, Algeria. But collectively, throughout all these households, all these places that I've lived, now coming to the US, I would say the one thing I left with was, I guess the personal asset was like a cultural, a spirit of Ubuntu, like, you put the next person before yourself. So I've always, I've realized that I've done that, and people always mention that, that I always, put the next person before myself, because that's how I was raised.
Putting the other person before you.
Yeah.
Ubuntu.
Yeah.
I've heard that from what? South Africa? It's also in Nigeria?
No, it's South Africa, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Namibia. So it's the same type of cultural elements around those countries.
Preferring the other person.
Yeah.
Wow, the good Samaritan story. Good, that's good. How about father and son?
I think the biggest thing I left home with what I learned was probably hard work and kind of finishing what you started. And being determined, kind of be focused to fight.
Yeah.
That's my attributes that I think I learned.
Yeah. Yeah.
But also knowing how to love and care, and also try to be there for people.
Great. How about Eric?
Well, which is the asset, that's the extension that he got from his grandfather, my father, who I grew up over in West Baltimore. And my father was from North Carolina, farming, and doing your whole thing. He was truly a self-made man in many aspects, because he himself didn't have his father. He only met his father like several times in his life, and I was with him out of all of his children to meet his father only twice in my life, and to never even share hardly a sentence. So he was a father that didn't have a father to show him how to be a father, but he was everybody's father in the community that we grew up in. So his crutch was the pain from his childhood, the alcoholism, but it didn't stop him from being a man's man, so to speak. He was the dad that took all the kids under his wing. They would love to sit on the back porch and hear Mr. Eddie's stories. Like, they knew him for the hunting, the fishing, the gardening, the mechanical work, because he was a brilliant mind. Like he fixed everybody's car, everybody's roof, everybody's basement, whatever, hot water heater. He was incredibly mechanically gifted. And he just taught all of us as kids, where there's a will, there's a way. There's never an excuse.
Yep.
And he taught us hard work and values. And I carried that throughout my life, and I've extended that to my children. That you give me a result, not an excuse. You give yourself a result, not an excuse.
Great, great. Is that Mr. Carroll?
You got it.
Yeah. Tell us.
I have a similar story to everybody, but I want to add something different. One of the defining moments for me, I kind of got from my mother was, each year we took a vacation, and I rolled that into my family's life. And I did that because one of the things I found in dealing with a lot of children and young people is they only see what they see every day, and that's just Baltimore. East Baltimore, West Baltimore. So for me, I wanted my kids to see that there was more to life than just Baltimore and DC or New York.
Yeah.
You know, so we went on vacation, we done things.
Yeah.
And because of that, I feel like my daughter now, she lives in California.
Yep.
My son lives in New York.
Yep.
You know, and my wife and I are happy with that because they're living their lives, they're following their dreams. And as a result of that, my daughter is 32, my son is 26. But even now, the first week of August, before that week comes, we calling each other. What we doing for vacation? You know, it's about that time. So that's always been instilled in them, you know, to enjoy life.
Yep.
You know, we've all worked hard. They seen me go out in the rain, in the snow. Because I used to, you know, I still work for MTA, you know, so I had to drive that bus in whatever condition.
Yeah.
So they seen the hard work. So, but also on top of that, I wanted them to understand, yeah, you work hard, but God said life, we have life and life more abundant.
Yeah.
So part of the abundant life is to be able to enjoy yourself. You know, you work every day and then you die. What is that?
Yeah.
So I wanted them to understand, no, you can enjoy life and work hard too. So that was a defining moment for me.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Listening to all of you, there is a theme that you have, and you might have gotten it from somewhere. Some of you talked about responsibility. Some of them you talked about, you know, a lesson in life, like you saw people with alcohol, and you have said, "This is not life. I'm gonna run away from that." You know, some of you have maybe seen hard life, like you talk about being raised, you know, in what, adoption or something like that.
Not just with family, different households.
Different households. Yeah. So you maybe there might come a theme there of maybe desiring to stability or something like that. Some people might. So the question number 2 talks about that theme. I think, you know, what major themes for your life did you leave home with? Have those themes shaped your life both positively and negatively? Some people grew up in a home that really didn't have structure. And so the idea of structure might be very key to them. Some people might have grown in homes where poverty was there, and maybe somebody became very driven, running away from that poverty, and so on and so forth. My theme, it has to do with being responsible, being accountable. You know, somebody who can actually give an account to why this is happening. You know, like when I decided to do something like this, even if you saw me late, this will happen. Anything that I decide I would do, I will do it regardless. Like I was telling the group last night, Last night was lesson number 22. From the beginning of the year, we have met every other Friday night, which is Saturday for them, for 22 times. So I'm going to finish the 24 lessons for them, the guys in Kenya, in 10.5 months, because the middle of November is when we do lesson 24. We are here with you. Unless I travel, this is not gonna fail. Whether it is snow, whether it is what, because we live in a place where you can always get where you want to get, right? So commitment is another thing. Commitment. Commit and keep on. Because why? You thought about it and you planned about it. Finish it. So even if you are 2 people and I am here, the Bible says where 2 or 3 gather, there I will be in your midst. The Lord is here. Even if we find ourselves 2, me and you, I always say the Lord is number 3, or is the 3rd in that chord. So commitment and so on and so forth. So what themes might you add to your question number 2? Because we are here working on it. We are on page 17. What theme might you add to your list? What theme?
I can have one.
Yes, sir.
I didn't know it when I was younger and coming up, even though I did things a certain way in life. When I first joined ministry, my mentor told me something, because I used to always struggle with, where do I find the people to help me to get where I want to go? Because I was looking at, and I can be transparent, I was looking at some pastors who were supposed to be leading me and guiding me, but they weren't giving me the information that I needed.
Yeah.
And he says sometimes it's not learning what you need to know, but learning what you don't want to know.
Yeah.
So from that, I gleaned the fact that sometimes people are not telling you what you want to know, but telling you what not to do. And what I mean by that is my story is very similar to the pastor in the lesson. My father struggled with alcohol bad.
Yeah.
He was even committed to an institution when I was about 14.
Yeah.
And he later died when I was 17. I didn't have the ridicule because my friends were truly my friends. They didn't bring it up. They didn't use it against me. But what I learned from that, what I say, what not to do is what you said earlier. I don't drink. So what I've learned from that is not to take on the habits that he did. He was a hardworking man. He worked for Zenith. Y'all know back then that was the big TV company. It was on Zenith. He drove a truck for Zenith, and he drove till alcohol took him, to that point. But what I learned is the things not to do, because when we went on vacation, he was never there. When we did things in life, he was never there. He came home, like you said, but when it came to family and participating in all those things, he didn't do any of that. So for me, I learned to be the opposite. I was at every game. I was at my daughter's dance recital. Boy, was that rough. But I was there, so I learned to be present for everything by his absence. So that was the theme for me.
Thank you. Wow, that's a lesson.
I have a very similar thing to his.
Yeah.
Almost mirrored. I often told my kids, both of them, I'm like, do you know what daddy's always there? I said, throughout, I was state champion, much like him, state champion. Helped to make him one. And I said, I never missed none of your sporting events. One. I said, count on one hand. And I had to work and I couldn't get out of it. One Saturday. And I said, this is why you never seen alcohol in the house. Because the one time my father showed up, state championships, and I was multiple, he was drunk. And I said, look at the irony of that. Good man, but that's the only time he showed up, the only time I missed. For y'all. And I said, you don't know what that pain is like. That's why I never did anything to give you that experience.
Yep. Well, that's a lesson there. Being there is really key for your child. Whether your daddy was not there, you know that not being there is not good. Be there. I try as much as I can to be in anything that my kids actually are into. I was there when my daughter graduated from boot camp in Chicago, the Great Lakes, to go to the US Navy. When she also graduated after the classes they do in San Antonio, I was there. I've been in every of their graduations. Anything they do, I am there. Was my father there? No, he wasn't, because he worked 5 days in a week in the city, and it was quite a distance. He didn't drive. He had to depend on public transportation. But Saturday, he was home. So if things were happening Saturday, he'll be there. But those things that are happening in the week, he delegated. I learned, okay, you can delegate, but if you can be there, be there. It's really key, because your presence makes the difference. Your presence makes the difference. There are things that I learned not to do the way my father did. Earlier on, he used to do alcohol, but I used to see him do it without showing us. If he drank, he would come straight and sleep. He used to smoke, but he used to go out of the house and smoke outside. And he would never send us to the store to buy a cigarette. Later on, he gave it up, became born-again man, became a church elder, and for the latter years, like 20 years of his latter life, he was a church man, and that I admired. That I admired. I had come to the Lord long before he did. and there are some good things to learn from family. There are some other things that you learn to a negative lesson, and you choose that is a no-no, and I'll stay away from that. It's good to think about those themes. They are very, very important. Anybody else has a theme?
That's why I like to read, Dr. Karanja.
Yes.
What we're talking about made me think about kings. And we're all kings in our homes, right? So I'll put you 2 Kings chapter 13, verse 1, 2, 3, and 4. It says, in the 23rd year of Joash, the son of Ahaziah, king of Judah, Jehoahaz, the son of Jehu, began to reign over Israel and Samaria, and reigned 17 years. And here's the point. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, and followed the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, which made Israel to sin. He departed not therefrom. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he delivered them into the hand of Hezekiah, Hazael, king of Syria, and into the hand of Benadad, the son of Hazael, all their days. Jehoiakim besought the Lord, and the Lord hearkened unto him, for he saw the oppression of Israel, because the king of Syria oppressed him. I read that, and I was thinking about what we are discussing. While I was growing up, I've observed men. I've observed my father. I observed my brother, who poured a lot into me. My father asked I found out years later, my father asked my brother, who dad lived in another state, to look out for me. So the oldest brother looked out for the youngest brother. And over time, when I left home in the Navy, in my mind, and even today, I thought my goal is to do better than they've done. To do better. I believe I've done better. But I've also learned that I can't do better without other men giving me wisdom. And it's not that I'm competing with them, but I want to do better. And without God, without godly men or men with wisdom and understanding, I'm not going to do better. I'm not. But these men.
Thank you, sir. Look at the verse that they gave us, the second one on page 92 of look back. Ephesians 5, 15 and 16. Therefore, be careful how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of your time, because the days are evil. I look at men, and I work as a counselor, and sometimes some people are not careful how they walk. I look at young men who decide, say, to watch porn. What will it do to you? It will mess your mind. Young men who decide to take weed, marijuana, what will it do to you? It will make you irrational. You will minimize things. About alcohol, it's a depressor. It will depress your nervous system, and you never take anything serious. Everything will look like it's okay, but it's not. So, how you walk as wise. I tell people I never put anything in my head except this thing. And it's a good one. I can put as much. There will always be water wherever I am. I always go to Oman and bring water for me and for all of us, because this is key. So, and then things like this, I'll put this in my head because it is good, right? The word of God. And in a literature that is good to put in, but I'll never put things that would destroy me. Why do that? Why do that? I want to walk wise. I want to walk wise because it is important. How about question number 3? If you could change one thing about your upbringing, what would it be?
Well, for the blessings that I've obtained, I can't change anything.
Mhm.
And been through a whole lot.
Mhm.
We'll probably talk about that one day.
Mhm.
But I had one of his coaches
Mhm.
asked me. He was like, "Man, you don't wear none of that." I said, "For the blessings that I've had,
Mhm.
I can't wear none of that, because overcoming it and
Mhm.
conquering that,
Mhm.
why would I question it?
Mhm.
It was what I was born into.
Mhm.
You can't change what you were born into, but you can change
Mhm.
how you move from that point forward."
Yes, sir. How you move forward. So the question is, if you could. Obviously, there's an implication that you can.
If I could,
Mhm.
it would the family dynamic.
Yes.
If I could, it would be that family dynamic that I was born
Yes.
into, which I had no control over.
Yes. So if I could myself, I would inculcate things in my siblings that they never got. And I do. I try to invoke them. In some of these classes that I do with the men in Kenya, I try to bring in my siblings in there, because by bringing them there, then I'm hoping some things will be caught and they'll be done to their grandchildren, if not their children. So I try to also get their children. My nephews, I try to put them in there. Some of them come, some of them don't. So if I could, I would rally them towards things that matter. Try to fish them. You know the way that the word of God tells us will be fishers of men. Try to get them and tell them, come and see this. This is good. Come listen to it. This is for you, just as much as it is for me. I wrote some notes here. Surround myself with better people. Make a good choice of who you are with. Don't just follow anybody. Choose who you walk with. Say no to something you saw in somebody and say, no, I will not do that. So surround yourself with the better people. And something else I would like to say to you is, something like a family altar or a family meeting in the house is very key. Eating together and having a little talk there is very key. That's when we spot some weeds in the family, something to take out, and we take it out. And then we introduce something else that it ought to be there. You know, just having that, and you're the head of that family, try to gather them and point out, you know what, son? I think I like what I saw you doing. Keep doing that. But you know what, son? I didn't like what I saw there. Let's get that out. You know, weeding out some things. So those are some things that I try to do. Some of them, they might not, you know, happen in the way I want, like trying to get older guys to really, you know, they say you can't straighten a tree when it's grown. You can only straighten it when it's a shoot. But I try to reach out. I try to reach out. I from where the way I'm oriented, I know if a man get it, so many people will get it. If a man get it, really get it, so many will benefit. The family will benefit, the church will benefit, the community will benefit, the nation will benefit. So let's get this thing. Let's get this thing. Anyone want to comment on question 3? If you could change one thing, what would it be? Yes, sir.
I like what was said. Again, my story is similar. We seem to have a lot going on there, but for me, not so much about myself, but the destructive lifestyle that my father led, because it ultimately ended up with my children never really knowing, or never knowing, only hearing stories about their grandfather. And I would have liked for them to at least have known who he was and make their own assessments, you know, and have some type of bond with him.
Yeah.
So because of the lifestyle that he led, and to make it even more so, was interesting because my wife's father passed at the same time as my father. So my children have grown up without having any grandfather.
Any grandparents.
So I would have, I mean, they had their grandmothers, but no fathers.
Yeah.
So I would like to have them have been present to share some of the stories of how it was in the 50s and 60s, and just kind of put that in their life so they have another perspective to kind of go on. So, you know, I would have liked for that to have been different.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You know, this video that we saw today, you can all tell me which part made you sad. When this guy wedded, his father never showed up. That has never left me when I have seen this. I mean, I've been on this video many times. I mean, what would it speak of you if your son is wedding or having a major event and you're not there?
Right. You're alive.
Oh my God, you're not dead. You're not in a coffin, and you're not in jail.
Right.
But you're not there for your son. That was a big shame. That was a big shame. His father-in-law was there, his mother-in-law was there, his brothers were there, but his daddy was not there. That he was so drunk that he couldn't get out of bed. Now my neighbor, where I live, I think he was wedding today, and they woke up very early, and there was a lot of noise outside. So my wife and I woke up and were being, we saw they are dressed up to go to a wedding, and they were taking pictures, and we were very enthused. A wedding is a sweet thing, you know, a great thing. I mean, it's one of the noble moments. It's one of the highlights. Another one is a graduation. Anyway, I think there are things we could change. Are you familiar with the serenity prayer? God grant me the courage to change things that I can, the grace to bear with things that I cannot change, and the wisdom to know the difference. I always say there are things I can change. I'll change those with the courage that I could get. And those that I can't, I have the grace to live with them, right?
Funny, we talk about wisdom, we had that conversation on the way over.
Yeah.
I said, son, you gotta have the right information
Yes.
to have the right knowledge.
Mhm.
And once you have the right knowledge,
Mhm.
you'll truly have wisdom.
Yep.
I said, but if you have the wrong information,
Mhm.
you will become a knowledgeable fool
Yep.
that will do unwise things.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. So let them never ever say they did not have guidance, that they didn't have encouragement, that they didn't have your input. Let them never say you were not there. Let them say, I got what I needed. It's me who processed it the way I did. Somehow I can never blame my father for anything. I can never blame him because his life was his life. He was hardworking. He was industrious. He had to work in the city. He grew up in the days when they were colonized, and he fought his life. I treasure my father for having been able to come out of the colonial days when they had been scattered. He came back and amalgamated little pieces of land to one block. How he did it, it's a treasure. And I always want to emulate him. I always want to gather other than scatter. Gather other than scatter. Anyway, it was a joy to do lesson number 3. Lesson number 4, remember we are now trying to move ahead. You know, second step to authentic manhood is unpacking. He talked about that we must unpack our past. We must unpack it. Whatever it was, unpack it. So you can now, know exactly what that was. So you can learn from it and move on. So I'll be here. Let me tell you, I always like to mention which day we are meeting. We meet with your class first and third Saturday. You know what that is? The first Saturday of November is the 5th, right? So we are not meeting on 22nd. We are not meeting on 29th. We are meeting on the 5th. That's when I'll see you. So I'll see you 5th and then again 19th. We meet first and third. Because I have another group that I handle 2nd and 4th. You know that? And Mr. Caro is in both classes. And his brother Rodney, they're coming for both. I like that company, right? So, gentlemen, it's a pleasure. I really thank God. Let's do this. Let's walk this journey together. It's not in vain. I can tell you this. The children that will be born by those younger people like Eric here, hey, they will have some of these nuggets already packaged in there, right? Yeah. And us, I'm looking forward to when my children will decide to make me a granddaddy. I'm ready to spoil those kids, but with the right nuggets. When that happens, right? So God is good. Yeah. So I look forward. Let's emulate. Let's put these things into practice. Thank you. It was a joy to have you there. I will see you next.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.